The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Kensington Palace as Prince William sat at his desk, staring at the official letter that had arrived just hours earlier. His hands trembled slightly as he read the words again, hoping somehow they would change. The news was devastating, and he knew it would shake the very foundation of everything they had worked for. Kate walked into the room carrying 2 cups of tea, her usual bright smile fading instantly when she saw her husband's pale face. She had never seen him look so defeated, not even during the darkest moments of their royal duties. The cup in her hand nearly slipped as she noticed the official seal on the letter. "What is it, William?" she asked softly, setting the tea down on the mahogany table. Her voice carried that familiar strength that had gotten them through countless challenges. But there was an underlying tremor that betrayed her growing concern. William looked up at his wife, the woman who had stood by him through scandals, media, storms, and family tragedies. Her presence had always been his anchor, but even Kate couldn't fix what was happening now. He handed her the letter without saying a word, watching as her eyes scanned the formal language and legal terminology. The document detailed allegations that could destroy not just their reputation, but their ability to serve the people they had dedicated their lives to helping. Someone had been systematically collecting information about their private charitable work, twisting their genuine efforts to help vulnerable communities into something sinister and self-serving. Kate's face went through a series of emotions as she read. First confusion, then disbelief, and finally a deep sadness that seemed to age her before William's eyes. She sank into the chair across from him, the letter falling to her lap as she struggled to process what this meant for their family, their children, and their future. "This can't be real," she whispered, but they both knew it was. The evidence presented was carefully crafted, mixing truth with lies in a way that would be difficult to disprove. Someone had spent months, maybe years, building this case against them. The timing was particularly cruel, coming just days before they were scheduled to visit a children's hospital that had been their pet project for the past 3 years. William reached across the table and took Kate's hands in his. They were cold despite the warm morning, and he could feel them shaking. In all their years together, through wedding pressures, royal protocol lessons, and even the loss of his grandmother, he had never seen Kate this shaken. "We'll fight this," he said, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. "We know the truth. The people we've helped know the truth. Our work speaks for itself." Kate nodded, but tears were already forming in her eyes. She thought about the families they had met, the children whose faces lit up when they visited, the genuine connections they had formed over years of dedicated service. How could anyone twist those beautiful moments into something ugly and manipulative? The couple sat in silence for what felt like hours, each lost in their own thoughts about what the future might hold. Outside, London continued its daily rhythm, unaware that 2 of its most beloved public figures were facing the greatest crisis of their lives. A soft knock at the door interrupted their thoughts. Their private secretary entered with an apologetic expression, carrying another stack of papers. The media had somehow gotten wind of the allegations. The phones were ringing nonstop with requests for statements, and security was already being increased around all their residences. "The palace wants to schedule an emergency meeting," the secretary explained, his voice carefully neutral despite the gravity of the situation. "They need to know how you want to respond before the story breaks publicly." William and Kate exchanged glances. They both knew that once this story hit the newspapers, there would be no going back to their normal lives. Every appearance, every speech, every charitable event would be viewed through the lens of these allegations. Their children would grow up with this shadow hanging over their family name. "Tell them we'll be there in an hour," William said finally, "and cancel all our public appearances for the rest of the week." After the secretary left, Kate stood up and walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens. The roses were in full bloom, and she remembered how excited she had been to plan this garden when they first moved in. Everything had seemed so hopeful then, so full of possibility. "Do you remember what your mother used to say about facing difficult times?" Kate asked, not turning around from the window. William joined her at the window, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "That storms don't last forever, but the damage they leave behind can change the landscape permanently." "No," Kate said, finally turning to face him with tears streaming down her face. "She used to say that the hardest battles are fought by those who have the most to lose, but also the most to give." For the first time since reading the letter, William felt a spark of something other than despair. His mother had faced her own share of public scrutiny and personal attacks, but she had never let them stop her from helping others. Perhaps this crisis, as devastating as it seemed, was just another test of their commitment to service. "We're not going to let them destroy what we've built," Kate continued, her voice growing stronger. "Those children in the hospital are counting on our visit. The families we support need to know we're still fighting for them." William nodded, feeling some of his strength return as he watched his wife transform her fear into determination. They had faced challenges before, but never anything quite like this. The path ahead would be difficult, possibly the most difficult thing they had ever navigated together. As they prepared to leave for the palace meeting that would determine their immediate future, both William and Kate knew that the next few days would test not just their marriage, but their very identity as public servants. The allegations were serious enough to end careers and destroy reputations, but they also represented an opportunity to prove that their dedication to helping others was genuine and unwavering. The morning sun had given way to gathering clouds, and as they walked hand in hand toward their waiting car, neither of them could shake the feeling that they were walking towards something that would change their lives forever. The emergency meeting at Buckingham Palace felt like a trial before the actual trial had even begun. William and Kate sat across from a table of stern-faced advisors, lawyers, and communications experts who had been hastily assembled to deal with what everyone was calling the situation. The head of communications, a woman in her 50s with silver hair and sharp eyes, spread newspapers across the mahogany table like evidence at a crime scene. Even though the story hadn't officially broken yet, leaked details were already circulating in certain circles, and the headlines being prepared were devastating. "The allegations center around financial irregularities in your charitable foundation," she explained, her voice clinical and detached. "Someone has documented every donation, every expense, every decision made over the past 5 years. They're claiming that funds meant for disadvantaged children were diverted to cover personal expenses." Kate felt her stomach drop. Their foundation had been her pride and joy, something she had poured her heart and soul into building from the ground up. Every penny had been carefully tracked and documented, precisely because they knew their work would be scrutinized more than any ordinary charity. "But we have receipts for everything," Kate said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Every donation can be traced. Every expense was approved by the board and audited annually." The lawyer, a distinguished man with graying temples, shook his head grimly. "That's exactly what makes this so sophisticated. Whoever compiled this, evidence knows your systems inside and out. They've taken legitimate expenses and recontextualized them to appear suspicious." William leaned forward, studying the documents spread before them. Someone had taken a photo of Kate shopping for clothes and labeled it as expensive shopping spree funded by charity money. In reality, she had been purchasing professional attire for a series of fundraising events, clothing that would be worn once and then donated to auction for additional funds. "This is character assassination," William said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Someone with access to our private schedules, our financial records, our personal communications has been building this case for months." The security chief, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat. "We believe the leak is coming from inside the organization. Someone close enough to have intimate knowledge of your daily operations, but also someone with access to financial Records and private communications. The words hit Kate like a physical blow. She thought about their small, trusted staff, people who had worked with them for years, who had been invited to family celebrations and had become almost like extended family themselves. The idea that one of them could be systematically betraying their trust was almost harder to accept than the allegations themselves. "Who?" she asked quietly, though part of her didn't want to know. "We're still investigating," the security chief replied. "But the leak is definitely internal. The level of detail, the access to private conversations and documents, the knowledge of your personal schedules, it has to be someone you trust completely." William stood up abruptly and walked to the window overlooking the palace courtyard. Outside, tourists were taking photos and children were running around feeding pigeons, completely unaware of the crisis unfolding inside. In just a few hours, those same tourists would be reading headlines that could destroy everything he and Kate had worked to build. "What do our options look like?" William asked, not turning away from the window. The communications expert consulted. Her notes: "We can go on the offensive, hold a press conference, release all financial records, provide context for every questionable expense. But that approach is risky because it keeps the story in the headlines longer and gives our critics more ammunition to work with." "Or," Kate prompted, "we can minimize engagement, release a brief statement denying the allegations, and hope the story dies down quickly. But that approach makes it look like we have something to hide." Kate closed her eyes, feeling trapped between two equally devastating options. Either way, their reputation would be damaged, their ability to help the causes they cared about would be compromised, and their children would grow up with this cloud hanging over their family name. "There's a third option," the lawyer said slowly, as if reluctant to suggest it. "We could temporarily step back from all charitable work while the investigation proceeds. It would protect the organizations you support from being tainted by association, but it would also mean abandoning the work that matters most to you." "Absolutely not," Kate said immediately, her voice fierce with conviction. "The children's hospital visit is scheduled for tomorrow. We've been planning this for months. The kids are expecting us, and some of them—" Her voice broke slightly. "Some of them might not have many more opportunities to meet us." William returned to the table, his jaw set with determination. "Kate's right. If we cancel our charitable commitments now, it looks like an admission of guilt. It also means that whoever is doing this to us wins." The room fell silent as everyone contemplated the impossible situation they were facing. Outside, they could hear the sound of helicopters circling overhead, media crews already positioning themselves for what they sensed would be a major story. "The children's hospital visit is particularly problematic," the communications expert said carefully. "If the allegations have already leaked to certain media outlets, you'll be walking into a potential ambush. Every photo, every interaction with sick children will be scrutinized and potentially twisted to support the narrative that you're exploiting vulnerable people." The drive to the children's hospital the next morning felt like traveling toward an inevitable disaster. William and Kate sat in the back of their official car, both lost in their own thoughts, as London's familiar streets passed by the bulletproof windows. The morning newspapers lay unopened between them, though they both knew the headlines would be devastating. Kate's phone had been buzzing constantly with messages from friends, family members, and colleagues who had seen the early online reports. She had turned it off an hour ago, unable to bear reading any more expressions of shock, sympathy, or worse yet, doubt about their innocence. "We could still turn around," William said quietly, though they both knew that wasn't really an option. The hospital had been preparing for their visit for weeks. Children had been practicing songs, artwork had been completed, and families had arranged their schedules around this one bright moment in what were often very dark times. Kate shook her head, straightening her jacket and checking her appearance in the small mirror from her purse. She had spent extra time on her makeup this morning, knowing that every photo taken today would be analyzed for signs of guilt, stress, or deception. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was preparing to visit sick children while being accused of exploiting them for personal gain. "Sarah's in room 304, Kate said, referring to a 7-year-old girl with leukemia whom they had met on their last visit 3 months ago. "She's been working on a painting for us. I promised her we'd see it." The weight of that promise hung between them. Sarah was one of dozens of children who had formed personal connections with the royal couple over years of regular visits. These weren't photo opportunities or publicity stunts. They were relationships built through repeated visits, remembered conversations, and genuine care. As they approached the hospital, they could see the media circus that had assembled outside. Television vans lined the street. Photographers with massive lenses waited behind barriers, and reporters practiced their opening lines for what would undoubtedly be intense coverage of every moment of their visit. "The allegations broke online 20 minutes ago," their security chief informed them through the communication system. "Full story will be in tomorrow's papers, but the major news websites are already running with it." Kate felt her chest tighten. Every child they hugged today, every moment of genuine joy or comfort they provided, would now be viewed through the lens of these accusations. Their critics would say they were using sick children as props to rehabilitate their damaged reputation. KTD. Car pulled up to the hospital's main entrance, where the medical director and senior staff were waiting nervously. Word had clearly reached them about the brewing scandal, and their faces showed a mixture of support and concern about being associated with the controversial royal couple. Dr. Matthews, the hospital's chief pediatric oncologist, approached their car with a strained smile. Kate had worked closely with him over the years, and she could see the conflict in his eyes, his genuine affection for them battling with concern about what this scandal might mean for his hospital's reputation and funding. "Your Highnesses," he said formally, though his usual warmth was notably absent. "The children are very excited to see you, though I should mention that some of the older patients have heard about the news reports." Kate's heart sank. She hadn't considered that the children themselves might be aware of the allegations. The idea that kids dealing with their own life-threatening illnesses might now question whether her care for them was genuine was almost unbearable. They walked through the hospital corridors that had become familiar over years of visits, but everything felt different now. Staff members who usually greeted them with genuine smiles now offered polite but reserved nods. Parents who typically approached them eagerly for photos and conversation hung back, uncertain whether association with the royal couple was still something to celebrate. Their first stop was the children's ward, where a group of young patients had prepared a special presentation. As they entered the brightly decorated room, Kate was struck by how innocent and hopeful the children looked, completely unaware of the adult world of politics and scandals swirling around them. 8-year-old Tommy, who had been receiving treatment for brain cancer, ran up to William with a drawing he had made. "Prince William, I drew you and Kate as superheroes," he exclaimed, holding up a colorful picture that showed stick figures with capes flying over a hospital. William knelt down to Tommy's level, accepting the drawing with genuine emotion that had nothing to do with cameras or public relations. "This is incredible, Tommy. Kate and I will treasure this forever." But even as they went through the motions of their visit, admiring artwork, listening to songs, playing games with children who had few other opportunities for joy, both William and Kate could feel the weight of scrutiny from staff, parents, and security personnel who were all wondering whether this display of caring was genuine or calculated. When they reached Sarah's room, the 7-year-old was waiting with her painting propped up on a small easel beside her bed. The artwork showed a rainbow over a castle, with 2 figures standing in front holding hands. "It's you and Kate at your castle," Sarah explained proudly. "The rainbow means hope, and my mom says you bring hope to people like me." Kate sat on the edge of Sarah's bed, fighting back tears as she examined the painting with genuine admiration. This child, facing her own mortality with incredible courage, had spent hours creating something beautiful to give to them. The purity of that gesture stood in stark contrast to the ugly accusations being made about their motives. "Sarah, this is the most beautiful painting I've ever seen," Kate said, her voice thick with emotion. "Would it be okay if we hung it in our home so we can think of you every day?" Sarah nodded enthusiastically, then grew more serious. "Some of the nurses were talking about bad things people are saying about you on TV. But I know you're good people because you remember my name, and you always ask about my cat." The simple truth of that statement hit Kate harder than any lawyer's argument or media expert's strategy could have. Here was a child fighting for her life, who understood better than any adult that genuine caring couldn't be faked through repeated visits and remembered conversations. As they prepared to leave Sarah's room, Kate realized that regardless of what happened with the investigation, regardless of how their reputations might be damaged, moments like these were exactly why they did this work. The children didn't care about headlines or allegations. They cared about having adults who showed up consistently and treated them with dignity and love. The final stop of their hospital visit was the intensive care unit, a place they rarely visited during public tours due to the sensitivity of the patients and families there. But Dr. Matthews had specifically requested they make an exception, today for one family who had been asking for them. As they walked down the sterile corridor toward the ICU, Kate noticed how quiet everything had become. The usual bustle of hospital activity seemed muted, and she realized that word of their presence and the surrounding controversy had spread throughout the entire facility. "The family I want you to meet has been here for 6 weeks, Dr. Matthews explained in a low voice. "Their daughter, Emma, is 11 years old, and she's been in a coma following complications from surgery. The parents have been asking specifically to meet you both, and frankly, I think they need hope more than they need to worry about politics." William and Kate exchanged glances. Visiting a child in a coma wasn't something they had done before, and under normal circumstances, they might have questioned whether it was appropriate. But these weren't normal circumstances, and if their presence could provide any comfort to desperate parents, they had to try. The ICU was a maze of machines, monitors, and medical equipment that beeped and whirred with mechanical precision. In the center of it all was a small bed containing a little girl who looked impossibly fragile, surrounded by all the technology keeping her alive. Emma's parents, David and Helen, stood up when they entered the room. Both looked exhausted beyond description, with the hollow-eyed appearance of people who had been living on hope and hospital coffee for weeks. Helen was clutching a worn teddy bear, and David's clothes suggested he hadn't left the hospital in days. "Your Highnesses," Helen said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you so much for coming. We weren't sure if you would still—" Her voice trailed off, but the meaning was clear. Even in their darkest moment, these parents had heard about the allegations and wondered if the royal couple they had hoped to meet were really the people they appeared to be. "Of course we came," Kate said immediately, moving toward Emma's bedside. "Tell us about Emma. What does she love? What makes her laugh?" The simple questions opened a floodgate of emotion from the exhausted parents. Helen began describing their daughter's passion for horses, her love of reading, her dream of becoming a veterinarian. David showed them photos on his phone of Emma, healthy and smiling, riding her pony at their small farm outside London. As Helen talked, she unconsciously began stroking Emma's hand, and Kate noticed the little girl's fingers seemed to twitch slightly in response to her mother's touch. She had read about cases where coma patients responded to familiar voices and gentle contact, even when they appeared completely unconscious. "Would it be all right if I talked to her?" Kate asked gently. "Sometimes. Children can hear us even when they can't respond." Helen nodded eagerly, stepping back to give Kate space beside the bed. Kate took Emma's small hand in hers and began speaking in the same warm, conversational tone she used with her own children. "Hello, Emma. My name is Kate. Your mom and dad have been telling me about your pony and how much you love animals. I have children too, and they would love to meet someone who knows so much about horses." As Kate spoke, something extraordinary happened. Emma's eyelids began to flutter, just slightly, but enough for everyone in the room to notice. The monitors showed a subtle increase in brain activity, and Dr. Matthews stepped forward to observe more closely. "Emma, can you hear us, sweetheart?" her mother asked, tears streaming down her face as she leaned over the bed. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, nothing happened. Then, so slowly that they almost missed it, Emma's eyes opened just a fraction. She couldn't speak with the breathing tube in place, but her gaze seemed to focus on Kate's face with an awareness that hadn't been there before. The room erupted in quiet chaos as medical staff rushed in to assess Emma's condition. Dr. Matthews was calling for tests and monitoring equipment, while Emma's parents sobbed with joy and relief. Through it all, Kate continued holding the little girl's hand, talking softly about horses and dreams, and all the things that awaited her recovery. William stood back, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of awe and heartbreak. Here was his wife, in the middle of the worst crisis of their public lives, providing exactly the kind of hope and comfort that had driven them to do this work in the first place. The allegations against them suddenly seemed not just false, but obscene in the face of such genuine human connection. "This is why we do this," Kate whispered to him later, as they prepared to leave the ICU. Emma had fallen back into unconsciousness, but her vital signs remained stronger than they had been in weeks, and her parents were more hopeful than they had been since the accident. "I know," William replied, thinking about how the media would cover this moment. They would either ignore it completely or, worse, suggest that it was a calculated publicity stunt designed to distract from the financial allegations. The cynicism of that interpretation made him feel sick. As they walked back through the hospital corridors, they were stopped by Dr. Matthews, who had been visibly emotional during Emma's brief awakening. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice unsteady. "I've been a pediatric physician for 30 years, and I've seen many celebrities and public figures visit sick children. Most of them are well-meaning, but they're also clearly uncomfortable and eager to complete their obligation and leave." He paused, looking directly at both of them with an intensity that demanded attention. "What I witnessed in that room today wasn't a photo opportunity or a publicity gesture. That was someone who genuinely cares about children connecting with. A little girl who desperately needed that connection. Whatever people are saying about you in the newspapers, I want you to know that your work here makes a real difference in ways that can't be measured or photographed." Kate felt tears threatening. Again, but this time they weren't tears of despair or frustration. They were tears of gratitude for this confirmation that their work mattered, that their motives were transparent to the people who worked with them most closely. As they finally left the hospital and faced the waiting media circus outside, both, William and Kate, felt something they hadn't experienced since the allegations first surfaced: certainty about who they were and why they did this work. The cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions about financial irregularities and misused donations, but those concerns seemed distant compared to the memory of Emma's eyes opening and her parents' tears of joy. The drive back to Kensington. Palace was quiet, both of them processing what they had witnessed and experienced. Whatever challenges lay ahead with the investigation, whatever damage might be done to their reputations, they now had something more valuable than any legal vindication: the knowledge that their work had genuine meaning beyond politics or public relations. 3 weeks after their hospital visit, the investigation had taken on a life of its own. William and Kate found themselves living under a microscope more intense than anything they had experienced since their wedding. Every public appearance was dissected, every charitable donation scrutinized, and every private conversation seemed to find its way into the tabloids. The morning brought another devastating revelation. Their head of security knocked on William's study door at 7 a.m., carrying a folder that he handled like it contained explosives. "Sir, we've identified the source of the leaks," he said, his voice heavy with reluctance to deliver bad news. "It's someone you both trust completely." Kate joined them, still in her dressing gown, having been awakened by the urgent conference. She took one look at the security chief's expression and sank into the nearest chair, bracing herself for another blow. "Who?" William asked, though part of him was no longer sure he wanted to know. "Rebecca Hayes, your private secretary for the past 4 years. The name hit Kate like a physical assault. Rebecca had been more than an employee. She had been a confidant, someone Kate trusted with her most private thoughts and concerns. Rebecca had organized their children's birthday parties, had comforted Kate during difficult moments, and had been invited to family celebrations as an honorary member of their inner circle. "That's impossible," Kate said immediately. "Rebecca has been nothing but loyal. She's practically family." The security chief opened his folder and spread out a series of photographs and documents that told a different story. Rebecca meeting with journalists in quiet restaurants, Rebecca photographing confidential documents with her phone, Rebecca recording private conversations during charity meetings. "We believe she's been gathering information for at least 18 months, he explained. "The sophistication of the case against you makes sense now. She had access to everything. Financial records, private conversations, your personal schedules, even your children's activities." William stared at the evidence, in disbelief. Rebecca had been present during some of their most vulnerable moments. She had seen Kate cry after difficult royal engagements, had witnessed William's private struggles with his role, had been trusted with information about their children that they shared with no one else. "Why?" Kate asked, her voice barely audible. "We treated her like family. We trusted her with everything." The security chief consulted his notes. "From what we can determine, she was approached by a group of individuals who convinced her that exposing what they called your exploitation of charitable work would serve the greater good. They made her believe she was protecting vulnerable people from being used as props for your public relations efforts. The twisted logic of it was almost more painful than simple greed or jealousy would have been. Rebecca had genuinely believed she was doing something noble by betraying the people who had trusted her most. She had convinced herself that their private moments of genuine emotion and care were elaborate performances designed to manipulate public opinion. "There's more," the security chief continued reluctantly. "She's prepared to testify publicly about what she claims to have witnessed. Private conversations where she alleges you discussed using sick children for publicity. Moments where she says you expressed frustration about having to visit hospitals and charities." Kate stood up abruptly and walked to the window, her hands shaking with anger and hurt. She remembered countless conversations with Rebecca about the children they had met, the families they had tried to help, the genuine connections that had formed over years of dedicated work. Rebecca had seen her tears of frustration when they couldn't help enough, had witnessed her private anguish over children who didn't survive their illnesses. "She's going to twist everything," Kate said, her voice hollow with realization. "Every private moment, every human reaction to tragedy and suffering, she's going to present it as evidence that we don't really care." William joined his wife at the window, placing a protective arm around her shoulders. Outside, protesters had gathered. At the palace gates, some supporting them but others carrying signs demanding their removal from all charitable work. The public was beginning to choose sides, and the division was becoming increasingly bitter. "What's our legal position?" William asked. "Complicated," the security chief admitted. "She signed confidentiality agreements, but whistleblower laws could protect her if she claims she's exposing wrongdoing for the public good. Her testimony, combined with the financial irregularities she's documented, could be very damaging." The phone in William's study began ringing, followed immediately by Kate's mobile phone, then the house phone. The news of Rebecca's planned testimony had leaked, and media outlets were scrambling for reactions and statements. "We need to get ahead of this," Kate said suddenly, turning from the window with a determination that surprised everyone in the room. "If she's going to tell her version of our private conversations, then people need to hear our version too." William looked at his wife with concern. They had been advised by legal counsel to say as little as possible publicly, to avoid giving their accusers more ammunition to work with. But Kate's instinct was telling her that silence was being interpreted as guilt, and that their only hope was complete transparency. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "A live television interview, prime time. We answer every question, address every allegation, and let people judge for themselves whether we're the people Rebecca claims we are or the people our work shows us to be." The security chief looked alarmed. "Your Highnesses, that's extremely risky. Live television means no control over the questions, no opportunity to edit your responses, and no protection if you say something that could be legally problematic." "Everything we've done for the past 5 years has been legally scrutinized and audited," Kate replied. "If we can't defend our work in public, then maybe we don't deserve to be doing it." William was quiet for a long moment, considering the risks and potential benefits of such a dramatic gesture. A live television interview would be a gamble that could either vindicate them completely or destroy them forever. There would be no middle ground. "The children we met at the hospital," he said finally. "Sarah with her painting, Emma waking up from her coma, Tommy with his superhero drawing. They know who we really are. If we can't trust the public to see what those children see, then maybe we're fighting the wrong battle." The decision felt simultaneously terrifying and inevitable. They would face their accusers not in court or through lawyers and public relations experts, but directly, honestly, and without the safety net that had protected them throughout their royal careers. "Set up the interview," William said to the security chief. "Live television, prime time, no pre-approved questions, and no limits on topics they can cover." Kate reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly as they committed to a course of action that would either save their reputation or end their public life forever. The next few days would be spent preparing for the most important conversation of their lives, knowing that the families they had tried to serve would be watching and judging whether their years of work had been genuine or merely an elaborate deception. The television studio felt like a courtroom as William and Kate took their seats across from Britain's most respected investigative journalist, Sarah Morrison. The interview was being broadcast live across the Commonwealth, and millions of people were watching to judge whether the royal couple were genuine humanitarian workers or sophisticated fraudsters. Kate's hands were steady now, though they had shaken uncontrollably during the car ride to the studio. She had made peace with whatever outcome this interview might bring, knowing that they had told the truth and done their best to help people who needed it most. "Let's start with the most serious allegation," Morrison began without preamble. "Your former private secretary claims that charity funds were regularly diverted to personal expenses. She has documented evidence of expensive purchases charged to charitable accounts." William leaned forward slightly, his voice clear and unwavering. "Every expense charged to our charitable accounts has been audited annually by independent accountants. The personal expenses Rebecca refers to include professional clothing purchased for fundraising events, travel expenses for hospital visits, and gifts for children we met during official charity work. But surely you can afford such expenses." "Personally," Morrison pressed, "why use charity funds at all?" Kate answered this time, her voice growing stronger as she spoke about work that truly mattered to her. "Because when you're raising money from people who have very little to give, every penny of your own money that goes toward genuine charitable expenses means more money available for the actual cause. The dress I wore to raise £50,000 for the children's cancer ward cost £300 from the charity account, but that event raised enough money to fund a new piece of medical equipment." Morrison consulted her notes, clearly prepared for that response. Rebecca Hayes claims she witnessed private conversations where you both expressed frustration about having to visit sick children, referred to hospital visits as obligations, and discussed using dying children as emotional props for your public image. Kate's eyes flashed with anger for the first time during the interview. That is a complete distortion of conversations Rebecca was never even present for. Yes, we have expressed frustration. Frustration that we couldn't do more. Frustration that funding was being cut for programs that saved lives. Frustration that politics sometimes prevented us from helping families who desperately needed support. Can you be more specific? Morrison asked. William took over, his voice heavy with emotion. 3 months ago, we had to tell the parents of a terminally ill child that the experimental treatment program was being discontinued due to lack of funding. I told Kate afterward that I felt helpless, that our position should give us more ability to fix these problems. If Rebecca interpreted that conversation as complaining about obligations rather than anguishing over our limitations, then she fundamentally misunderstood who we are. Morrison shifted tactics. Let's talk about Emma Patterson, the 11-year-old girl in a coma whom you visited 3 weeks ago. Rebecca claims this visit was a calculated publicity stunt timed to coincide with the breaking scandal. Kate leaned forward, her composure finally cracking as tears filled her eyes. Emma's parents had been asking to meet us for 6 weeks. We delayed the visit twice because of our schedule, and I've regretted that delay every day since. When Emma briefly woke up during our visit, it had nothing to do with cameras or publicity. It was a miracle that her parents had been praying for. But you have to admit the timing was convenient, Morrison pressed. The timing was heartbreaking, William said firmly. We were visiting a child fighting for her life while being accused of exploiting children for personal gain. If you think we orchestrated that visit for publicity, then you clearly don't understand what it's like to sit with parents who might lose their daughter. Morrison paused, consulting her notes again. Rebecca Hayes also claims that you maintain detailed files on the families you visit, including personal information about their finances, their relationships, their private struggles. She suggests this information is used to manipulate these families emotionally. Kate wiped her eyes, her voice growing stronger again. Of course we keep records. When you visit a child with cancer every few months for 2 years, you remember their siblings' names, their pets, their favorite books. You remember that their father lost his job to care for them full-time, or that their mother is struggling with depression. That's not manipulation. That's caring about people as individuals rather than statistics. Sarah Mitchell, the 7-year-old. With leukemia you mentioned earlier, William added, painted us a picture that we've hung in our private study at home. Not because it's good publicity, but because she spent hours creating something beautiful to give to us while dealing with chemotherapy. Those connections aren't calculated. They're human. Morrison leaned back, clearly surprised by the emotional depth of their responses. Rebecca Hayes claims she has recordings of private conversations that will prove her allegations. Are you concerned about what those recordings might reveal? William and Kate exchanged glances, and for the first time during the interview, Kate smiled slightly. If Rebecca has recordings of our private conversations about the children and families we've worked with, then I hope people listen to them carefully. They'll hear 2 people who care deeply about others, who often cry together after difficult visits, who lose sleep worrying about families facing impossible situations. They'll hear us arguing about whether we're doing enough, William added. They'll hear Kate insisting we extend visits longer than our security team recommends because a child needs more time. They'll hear me expressing frustration that our public role sometimes limits our ability to help people more directly. Morrison consulted her notes one final time. Given everything that's happened, the allegations, the investigation, the damage to your reputation, do you regret dedicating so much of your lives to charitable work? Kate didn't hesitate. The only thing I regret is that we trusted someone who was documenting our private anguish over children's suffering and interpreting it as evidence of insincerity. Every family we've met, every child who's shared their story with us, Every moment of genuine human connection, none of that was diminished by these allegations. "And what happens now?" Morrison asked. William straightened in his chair, his voice carrying the authority that came with years of public service. "We continue doing the work. Emma Patterson is still in the hospital. Sarah Mitchell is still fighting cancer. Families across the country are still struggling with challenges that our foundation can help address. These allegations haven't changed any of that. The investigation will conclude," Kate added, "and people will judge for themselves whether our years of work represent genuine commitment or elaborate deception. We're confident that the truth will speak for itself." As the interview concluded and the cameras stopped rolling, William and Kate sat in the studio for a moment longer, both emotionally drained but strangely peaceful. They had told their truth as completely and honestly as possible, holding nothing back. Outside the studio, their phones were already buzzing with messages of support from families they had worked with over the years. Dr. Matthews from the Children's Hospital had issued a statement defending their character. Parents of children they had met were calling news stations to share their own experiences with the royal couple. Most importantly, Emma Patterson had woken up again that morning, and her parents had sent a message saying that their daughter's first words were asking when Kate and William would visit again. The investigation would continue, legal proceedings would follow their course, and public opinion would ultimately decide their fate. But as they drove home through London streets lined with people holding signs of support, both William and Kate knew they had fought for something more important than their reputation. They had fought for the truth about why they chose to dedicate their lives to serving others. The heart-stopping sight that had threatened to destroy them, Rebecca's betrayal and the systematic dismantling of their life's work, had ultimately revealed something more powerful: the unbreakable bond between people who genuinely care for each other and the transparent sincerity that no amount of political maneuvering could fake or destroy.